This video is brought to you by Moomoo, a commission-free brokerage app that will give you up to 15 free stocks when you open an account and make a qualifying deposit. Link in the description below. Against the advice of his lawyers, Sam Bankman-Fried gave numerous interviews to both the traditional and alternative media following the exposure of his multi-billion-dollar fraud this past November. 2 months later, he was arrested in the Bahamas, extradited to the US, and now faces the prospect of potentially spending the rest of his life behind bars. He is currently out on bail living in his parents' luxury California property until his trial, which is scheduled for October. Many analysts assumed that he would use his last 10 months as a free man to play as much League of Legends as possible, as I hear that internet speeds aren't great in federal prison. However, it appears that he had different ideas. On January 12th, he published a lengthy blog post where he effectively takes zero responsibility. He instead puts the blame on Binance CEO CZ, as well as the bankruptcy liquidation team. On this channel, we've covered the FTX saga in detail, including the numerous contradictory statements and apparent lies that SBF has told throughout the process. But everybody deserves a fair hearing, obviously in the court of law, but also in the court of public opinion. So in this video, we'll take a deep dive into SBF's latest defense and what this could mean for his impending criminal trial. We've put a link to SBF's blog post in the description below if you want to read it for yourself. It mostly falls into 3 sections. Firstly, he explains why FTX and Alameda went bankrupt. Secondly, he explains why he did nothing wrong. And thirdly, given that he did nothing wrong, he finds other people to blame. He explains that going into 2022, Alameda had about $100 billion of assets, which were mostly invested in cryptocurrencies, including Serum, Solana, and of course FTX's native token FTT. SBF shares what he appears to be a screenshot from a Google Sheets showing Alameda's positions at the beginning of 2022. He said that Alameda borrowed $3 billion from FTX, which was collateralized by $28.5 billion that they had deposited into the exchange. This seemed to be a reasonable position, as Alameda's assets would have to decrease by 90% in value for their account to go negative. And presumably, FTX could liquidate the position long before this happens. As it turned out, Alameda CEO Caroline Ellison was not a very good investor. She did not see the incoming crypto winter, so invested Alameda's funds mostly into speculative altcoins. The 2022 crypto winter did not treat Alameda's portfolio kindly, and it started decreasing in value precipitously. Instead of reducing Alameda's altcoin positions, Ellison instead hedged the portfolio by shorting Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the QQQ Nasdaq 100 ETF. The thinking was, if the crypto winter continues, the profit from these short positions would offset the losses from their altcoins. Of course, this was an incredibly dumb idea. Even a novice crypto trader will tell you that during crypto winters, altcoins tend to decrease in value far faster than Bitcoin or technology stocks. All you would have to do is look back at what happened in 2017. The 28-year-old self-described Harry Potter fan apparently did not understand this. By October of 2022, the state of Alameda's balance sheet had deteriorated significantly. The value of assets they held on FTX decreased by roughly 50%, from $28.5 billion to $14.2 billion. Despite the massive decline in Alameda's asset value, FTX increased its lending to Alameda from just $3 billion at the beginning of the year to $10 billion by October. According to SBF, only $2 billion of Alameda's assets were liquid. If you exclude the illiquid parts of Alameda's portfolio, the crypto hedge fund was $8 billion underwater. This begs the question, why did FTX increase its lending to Alameda by such a large amount, given the deteriorating state of their balance sheet? According to Sam Bankman-Fried, there is some sort of glitch in the dashboard that he used to monitor customer leverage positions. The dashboard significantly understated the size of Alameda's loan. Whether this was intentional or not, it is now almost indisputable that Alameda had an infinite credit card, allowing it to draw on FTX customer deposits. In November, Binance CEO CZ announced that his firm would sell its $500 million stake in the FTT token, which caused the price to decline. This was a big problem for Alameda, because they owned a significant stake in that same coin. CZ's tweet was the straw that broke the camel's back. Given the precarious state of Alameda's balance sheet, there was a very high probability of it going bankrupt sooner or later. SBF accuses CZ of orchestrating a months-long PR campaign against FTX, which ultimately led to the collapse. Of course, he provides no evidence of this. Alameda went bankrupt and defaulted on its $10 billion loan. FTX had no way of paying back its customers, so it froze its withdrawals and ultimately filed for bankruptcy. At this point, the situation looks pretty bad for SBF. but he has a few points that he uses to defend himself. He points out that financial firms go bankrupt all the time. After all, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, but CEO Dick Fuld was never prosecuted. Given the Federal Reserve's rate hikes and the resulting declines in various asset prices, it should be expected that many financial firms will face liquidity issues. He specifically compares FTX to the Swiss banking giant Credit Suisse. Sam Bankman-Fried says, and I quote, "Credit Suisse fell nearly 50% this autumn on the threat of a run on the bank. At the end of the day, its run on the bank fell short. FTX's didn't," unquote. He appears to be referring to the roughly 50% decline in Credit Suisse's share price during the second half of 2022. What he's essentially saying is that given the macro environment, any financial firm could collapse. FTX just got unlucky. On closer inspection, SBF's comparison to Credit Suisse is so absurd that it's almost inconceivably that he actually believes it. If every bank went bankrupt every time their share price declined by 50%, there wouldn't be any banks left. Credit Suisse is a diversified company that engages in a wide variety of business activities. The part of their business that is the most analogous to FTX is their prime brokerage unit, which executes trades on behalf of its clients. They basically do the same thing that FTX did, but their clients trade stocks and bonds instead of crypto. If I open up a Credit Suisse account, those funds belong to me, not Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse has no legal right to spend my funds on their own. It makes zero difference if Credit Suisse's share price declines by 50, 80, or even 100%. If Credit Suisse goes bankrupt, I will still be able to withdraw my money, because Credit Suisse's creditors would have no claim on my assets. The only way their stock price would matter is if somebody within Credit Suisse decides to expropriate my funds and buy Credit Suisse stock without my consent. In practice, this almost never happens in the traditional financial industry, because it is illegal and whoever is responsible would end up in jail. But this is apparently what happened at FTX and Alameda. FTX customer funds were stolen, and Alameda used them to speculate on FTX's native FTT token. SBF's next line of defense is perhaps even more absurd than the previous one. He says, and I quote, "No funds were stolen. Alameda lost money due to a market crash it was not adequately hedged for," unquote. According to SBF, he has lost almost everything. A year ago, he had a net worth of $20 billion. Today, he is down to his last $100,000. $8 billion of FTX deposits are missing. If SBF stole the money, surely he should be living in luxury, right? How is it the case that he is down to his last $100,000? Let's suppose you work as a bank teller. One day, you decide to take $1 million from the vault and take it home with you. You take this $1 million to a casino and put it on the roulette wheel. If luck is on your side, that $1 million turns into $2 million. You return the $1 million that you borrowed from the bank, and you're left with a $1 million profit. Conversely, if you lost the money, it was the bank's money, not yours. It's a classic case of heads I win, tails you lose. In the eyes of the law, it doesn't matter what happens to the money after you steal it. Either way, you stole it. This is basically what happened at FTX, with Alameda being the metaphorical casino. Billions of customer funds were inappropriately siphoned to Alameda, which then used them to make risky crypto bets. If the bets worked out, Alameda, which is owned by SBF, keeps all of the upside. If the bets go south, FTX customers hold the bag. FTX customers didn't sign up for this, making it a fraud. FTX customer money was stolen. At this point, there's no doubt about it. The only question is, did SBF know about it? One of SBF's legal defenses will likely be that he didn't know what was going on at his own companies. He substantiates this by saying that his work ethic decreased in 2022. In 2019, he was working 18 hours per day. In 2022, this had decreased to just 12 hours. He did not clarify whether playing League of Legends is classified as working. Shortly after the fraud was exposed, SBF stepped down as CEO. He was replaced by the bankruptcy expert John Ray, who previously oversaw the Enron liquidation. John Ray hired a law firm called Sullivan & Cromwell to represent FTX's victims in the bankruptcy processes. Interestingly, FTX US's general counsel Ryan Miller used to work at Sullivan & Cromwell. On November 11th, right before stepping down as CEO, Sam Bankman-Fried filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings for FTX, FTX US, and Alameda. However, according to SBF, FTX US is fully solvent and could honor all of the customer withdrawals. Not only was this the case, but he was on the verge of arranging a bailout plan from outside investors, which could have saved the majority, if not all, of FTX International's depositors. So why did he file for bankruptcy? According to SBF, Sullivan and Cromwell and Ryan Miller conducted a sophisticated campaign to pressure him into the bankruptcy filing. They even went so far as to call SBF's friends and family, pressuring them into turning pressure on SBF. This harassment caused emotional damage to SBF's friends, some of whom came to him crying. As the benevolent leader SBF was, he caved into the pressure and agreed to sign the Chapter 11 documents against his better judgment. This is because he couldn't stand the emotional damage being inflicted on his subordinates. This makes him a truly honorable and selfless man indeed. I hope you can hear my sarcasm here. This is a common tactic that SBF uses. He says I effed up to make it look like he's taking responsibility. But at the same time, he comes up with the most bizarre excuses and blames everybody but himself. He throws out a bunch of numbers and creates a convoluted story in an attempt to obfuscate the truth and confuse people. And for some low IQ targets, this deception strategy works. According to SBF, there were billions of dollars lined up by outside investors who were willing to bail FTX out. However, S&C didn't entertain these ideas because they instead wanted to make legal fees from the bankruptcy process. SBF has not disclosed who these interested investors were, so we have no way of knowing who they are or if they even existed. But we have two data points which put extreme doubt over SBF's claim. FTX is $8 billion in the hole thanks to Alameda's losses. Most of Alameda's assets are likely worthless. For example, they spent $3 billion to buy Binance's 20% equity stake in FTX. Now that FTX is bankrupt, this equity stake is worthless. They also spent $4 billion investing in hundreds of small crypto startups. Given the crypto winter, as well as Caroline Ellison's lack of investing acumen, these venture capital stakes are also likely worthless. And finally, they own large amounts of FTT and other altcoins, which are now almost worthless. Long story short, the $8 billion that Alameda stole from FTX depositors has already been squandered. Even if they were willing to sell the company for just $1, any potential buyer would have to cough up $8 billion before they could start operating the company again. It's hard to imagine that anyone would pay $8 billion for a fraudulent crypto exchange whose brand value has been completely destroyed. As far as FTX US, John Ray says that the crypto assets of both FTX International and FTX US were housed in the same database and were both ultimately controlled by Sam Bankman-Fried. This makes it very difficult to tell which assets belong to international versus US customers. Thus, it is almost impossible to say whether or not FTX US is solvent. In November, SBF called up CZ of Binance, asking them for a bailout. Within less than 1 day of due diligence, Binance pulled out of the deal for the same reasons we previously discussed. SBF claims that CZ was playing four-dimensional chess. CZ supposedly engaged in the due diligence process with no intention of following through, purely as a sabotage tactic. But CZ wasn't the only one who contemplated a bailout. Anthony Scaramucci is a wealthy financier and crypto bull who has long been friends with SBF. Also in November, Scaramucci flew down to the Bahamas to meet with SBF and see if there's any way he could help. Within just 1 day, he realized that FTX was likely a fraud, so he left without making a deal. The fact that SBF thinks that he somehow could have saved his failed crypto empire shows how delusional he's become. He's grasping at straws, desperately thinking of ways to defend himself at his upcoming trial, which is scheduled for October. If I were advising him, I would say to play as much League of Legends as he can before the trial, as it may very well be his last 10 months as a free man. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about Sam Bankman-Fried? Do you lend any credibility to his latest blog post? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out.